I will talk about another commonly used higher order function called filter. So we've already talked about the map function, which takes another function and one list, or can be any iterable, and can actually be multiple iterables. But we'll just focus on our attention on this one iterable, and it applies that function to each element in that iterable, produce new elements, and all these new elements can go into another list or other type of sequence. Now, the important thing to recognize for map is that it produces the output list or iterable has the same number of elements as the input list. So there is another higher order function called filter that it takes similar parameters, so also a function and an iterable. Now the function that function also takes one parameter or one input, but it produces either true or false. Or if it doesn't return exactly true or false, say a number, then Python will interpret those according to the rules that it normally used to interpret whether something is true or false. Anyway, so filter applies that function to each of the elements in the input list or iterable. Now, if that function returns true, then it puts that element in the output list. If that function returns false for an element, then that element gets filtered out. So it doesn't get to put into the final output list. So that's what filter does. So the important difference between filter and map is that the final output list can potentially have different numbers of element than the original input list. So let's see how we can use a filter to solve some of the common problems we encounter. Let's say we have a list of numbers and we just want the odd numbers. So we can say filter and we can say a lambda x. Now, how we determine if a number is odd is that we take that number modulo by 2, and if the remainder is 1, then that's an odd number, right? So we can do that. Now, let me, right, of course, it returns a filter object. I'll talk about that in a bit. So we have to turn the final result into a list, and there we go. So here is all the odd numbers in the original list in the same order as they appear in the original list. Another thing that I want to say is that this is actually similar to a list comprehension, just kind of like map. So in this case, we would map it in such a way that so we'll keep the element in the list if the element modulo by 2 equals 1, right? So this is how we would do exactly the same thing, but with list comprehension. Okay, so let's see, this is what this slide is saying, and right, this is about list comprehension. So here is a little exercise for you that given a list of strings, and can you use filter to produce a new list that has all these strings that only has digits in them. So, keep 1, 2, 3, but throw away A, B, C. So pause the video, please, and give that a try. All right, so hopefully you had some time to work on it. So what we want to do is, again, we want a list that we will filter. Now, to determine if a string has digit or not, we can use the string is digit method. Now, we don't want to call that function. We just want to pass the function as it is onto the iterable. So let's hope that works. Yes, it does. Now, remember the argument, the first parameter to a filter is just any function, right? So I know we've been using lambda function, but it doesn't always have to be lambda. So if it's just a function that does exactly what we want, then we can just use the function as it is. So one final thing I want to say about map and filter is when do these functions actually apply the function on the iterables. And the reason I want to ask this is, as you saw previously, it happened a couple of times when we just print out what map returns, it doesn't actually return the result of applying the function to the iterable. It only returns what is a map object, or in case of filter, a filter object. So these are just objects that holds the information about what function to apply to and what iterable the function should be applied to, but no work is actually done. So that's why it's only a map or filter object. Now, in order to make map or filter to actually apply the function, then we'll have to tell it, hey, now we want the result. Let's say we want the result in a list. So please do your work, and then that only then would it actually produce the results. And another thing I want to point out is that when it applies the function, whatever it returns, it's not necessarily have to be put into a list like what we've been doing. So we can put it in a tuple and potentially other sequences. And that's what these two slides are trying to say. So hopefully it clarify why we have to say list in front of map.